Welcome everybody to the first Tech Talk of 2018. We hope you're having a great start to a very successful year in your organizations. I'm Pete Bartz, a systems engineer at Entuity, and I'll be your host for the next 20 or 30 minutes. Tech Talks, as most of you know, are designed for our customers and technical members of our authorized partner community. These sessions are recorded and are available on demand from the Entuity YouTube Center. They're a great resource for learning more about the product or reviewing features that you may be interested in implementing. A few housekeeping items before we get into the content for today. The call's on mute mode to eliminate any outside noise. Feel free to ask questions at any time via the chat panel, and we'll have time at the end to take your questions that have been posted. With that, let's get started. Today we'll be using Entuity 16.5 Patch 3. And by the way, if you have questions on this release, please don't hesitate to contact your Entuity system engineer. We're more than happy to discuss any facet of the product with you. Today's Tech Talk is all about service management. We're going to talk about why service management, why look at monitoring services versus just monitoring components. And we'll show you a number of examples and use cases on how to get more value from Entuity through managing by services. Before we get into the content again, I want to do a little bit of a reference back to some of the documentation. I'll be spending more time looking at use cases and some examples, and probably less time during this Tech Talk giving more instruction on how to build services and some of the components and some of those details. But to get that information, take a look at the System Admin Guide. And if you're looking for information about just services in general, take a look at Chapter 21. The branch office and CIO perspectives being special categories of services. Again, they're referenced in the Admin Guide as well, and you can take a look at instructions on how to build them and what the components look like, and a lot of the details in the guide there as well. Outside of the guide, if you look at the Entuity Context Help, just search for services or branch office or CIO, and the UI will take you right to those help documents as well. So with that, let's take a look at some of the use cases. Now, I put this slide up here. This is just food for thought, and these are some of the examples. And actually, I've got more examples than this of some of the use cases that I've run into in working with some of our customers and some of the thoughts that they've had. And these, again, will be cases that we'll take a look at in more detail. The idea is I want you to think about how to move from just element-based monitoring to more service management. Because right now, everybody looks at what's going on in the network. Entuity is extremely insightful in picking out the analytics of what's going on in the network and enabling you to be proactive and giving you good visibility into the behavior of the network, what's failing, what's working, what's not performing quite correctly from a performance standpoint. But again, these are all component-based events and alerts and component-based metrics that you're going to take a look at. What we want to do today is think about how do you go from just looking at improving MTTR or extending mean time between failure to more mean time for service restoration, so MTRS. So this is an ITIL version 3 construct that many organizations are moving to. You hear people talking about service modeling and being able to understand what is the impact of this component set, from our standpoint, be it the network, on this business service. Now, a business service can include things that are about business and business applications, but they can also include models that are about the network, and we'll show these in the examples. But it's really important to look at elevating your game. Go to the next step and really search for opportunities to look at services and model services so that you can very quickly spot behaviors and be alerted to behaviors that might impact a given service. The ability to do that enables you to be yet more proactive, because I see an impact on a service, I can very quickly into what's actually happening and what's causing that level of degradation or effectively unavailability. So with that, let's take a look at some examples. Let me share my screen out. We'll let WebEx do its magic. And I'll slide the WebEx bar out of the way here so I get full access to my browser. All right. So this is the service summary dashboard, and these are a number of services that I've got built in my environment. Now, these services live on my server, but this is actually a multi-server configuration as well. So I've got services that have been constructed on my consolidation server, where I've got components in multiple that actually are being monitored on multiple servers, and that's a construct that's new. That's been new a couple releases ago. And I've also got services that are built on the individual polling servers. So you can do both. I find the best practice is if you're building services, put them on your consolidation server and draw the components in from your remote systems. But you have the opportunity to do it either way. As we look at some of these examples, I think we're going to start with the first one. And what I'll do is, as I go through each one of these, I'm going to give you an explanation of what it is and why is it important to look at this type of a model and where this might be able to help you. And when we're done, I hope you have some additional ideas and thoughts on things that you might be able to think about for your environment. So let's take a look at the first one. This is actually simple. You can look at services and you can build services that are very simple. If you look at the documentation, especially if you look at the CIO documentation, you'll see that there's a level of hierarchy and there's some complexity in building these services. And you can certainly do that. And there's great value in that. But there's also great value in things that are very simple. This is a service, I call this Internet Links. Now, where I come from, and I'm sure if you're listening to this Tech Talk, you know where I come from as well, but the concept of multiple internet providers. Now, whether you're an MSP or a large enterprise, you're going to normally have multiple service providers. You're normally going to have service providers that have got multiple interfaces. So you've got some resiliency in your architecture, where if you have one circuit that fails, you've got another one that picks up, and you've still got service. This service is intended to look at a combination of interfaces and tell me if I've got an impact. So the reason I did this is I wanted to be able to see if I had commodity internet failures, because I've got two circuits that actually provide feeds for my internet. If one fails, I'm still fine. I might have a degraded level of service to some degree, but I'm up and running. I still am providing services to my customers. This is the same type of thing if you've got remote sites. I've got a remote site out to a remote location with a level of redundancy. If I want to be able to just monitor those redundant connections, all I need to do is build a service, put these two links in it, set up the type of availability methodology that I want here, and I'm done. So in my case, I used an OR construct, which says as long as one of these circuits is running, I'm okay. Now, this is very simple. It'll take you just a matter of minutes to build. And at the point that you build it, it's going to automatically start reflecting the current state of the service, as we're already picking up the state of the components. Anytime the state of these components change, we're going to update the state of the service and generate alerts. Now, availability is important for something like this because, if I do lose both these circuits at one time, it's something that I have to pay attention to. If I only lose one circuit, it could be a service provider that went down. It could be a device on my side of the network equation that went down, but I don't necessarily have to pay attention to it immediately. So this lets me look at that combined aggregation of these components. Now, we've taken this a step further because in my case, I would like to be able to compare the bills I get from my service provider that says you used this much internet access every month. So they're going to bill me, and they're going to bill me based on the aggregate use that I have drawn from them. Now, I could actually do reporting, and I could look at each one of my circuits and say, okay, I had this much traffic for the last 30 days, and I had this much traffic for the last 30 days, and put it all together and do that manually. But with Entuity, you've got the ability to actually enable an aggregation level. So you can actually do that by, right-click a service, go down and edit or create a service, and in that definition, you've got the ability to turn on a level of traffic aggregation. That says every 5 minutes we're going to go out and see what the last traffic use on each one of these circuits is, and we're going to add them together and give you an aggregate value, both inbound and outbound. Now, from a tracking and reporting perspective, that's great. I can use this to tie into some of the billing, and I can look at this over time. But I can also do a couple of other things. One of them is I can put thresholds against it. Now, thresholds for high traffic and low traffic can give me a notification if I've got consumers that are using more than maybe what I've got for a contracted level, where I might be paying more premium if I go over a certain level. But even more important than that, the low traffic capability to be able to threshold based on a low level of usage tells me if I've got a service provider that may have possibly dropped routes, so I might have connectivity to my remote site, or I may have connectivity to the internet, but I can't actually push traffic through it because the service provider's done something to limit my capability. So I may have gone from 1 megabit of traffic down to a soda straw, as a colleague of mine would have said historically. And once I do that, I want to be able to know, because I would consider this a brownout condition. It's something that a service provider caused from all aspects of element-based monitoring. All the lights are on, ports are up, devices are up, I've got connections out to the internet, everything seems to be working, but I can't pass traffic. So the ability to threshold and alert based on threshold conditions in an aggregate environment is something that can be really helpful. Now, you can take something simple like this and you can make it more complex. You could add more components to it. You could have one for every service provider. You could have one for every location. You've got really, based on your business requirements, you've got unlimited capabilities. But this is a really good, simple example. Let's take this one step further, and let's talk about the order processing service that I've got set up here. This is a case where you may be a service provider, and you may be, or a large enterprise, and you may have many remote sites. My remote sites might have redundant routers at the far end. They may have redundant links with multiple service providers. They may have redundant links where one of the links is a 3G or 4G connection, and the other one is a high-speed WAN connection. So obviously your backup connection is probably going to cost you a lot more money if you use it, or it's going to be a lot slower if you use it. But the order processing service here is an example of tying together combinations. So a combination of redundant links. If I take a look on the left navigation bar here and look at, I've got 2 ports. Obviously one of them is down, but the service is okay because I've set it up that way where I can lose a port and still be okay. So from a connectivity standpoint, I've got something I should pay attention to, but that's not impacting my service. The thing that's impacting my service is I've actually got a device down in Florida, which is actually where the team lives that's accessing this order processing application, where they're having problems getting out to the internet. So the devices that are controlling their access are really down, so access from Florida is a problem. If I took a look at the services, or the servers, my server pool service, this is my order processing. I'll show this a little bit bigger. This is my order processing server farm. Servers are just fine. My data center is not a problem. Connectivity to Florida is not a problem. But access out of Florida is. So I've actually got a service outage because Florida can't get to this application. Everybody else in the world can probably get to this order processing app, but Florida can't. So I've actually got a service impact here that I should pay attention to, I should be alerted on, and I can very easily see. But this is a very good model showing a little bit higher level of hierarchy. But the reason why you'd pay attention to this is because you may have clients sitting in one side of the world accessing an application on the other side of the world, and you'd like to be able to monitor both of those sides and put them together. Let's take a look at something that's a little bit different, not as complex, but it leverages the Entuity SurePath capabilities. So what I've done here in my routing services service definition is taken a number of network paths that I've actually added into the system. Now, I'm a network guy. I come out of that space, so things like asymmetric routing, routing loops, and things like that are things that are important to me. So in my network, I've created a number of network paths using SurePath to help me detect asymmetric routing behaviors. So anytime a path changes, and I won't go into details on what a network path does and what SurePath does, but anytime one of these paths changes from what I expect it to be, which would be my reference path, my standard path, it's going to tell me. And in this case, I've actually got a path that's changed, and it tells me here that I've changed this from reference, and it's degraded from what I expect it to be. Because I've combined these together into a service, I can now alert. I've elevated my game to alert at a service level to say I've got a routing behavior, a routing anomaly in my network, and I can do that with one alert. I can do that and track it at a management level. I can track it at an operational level, and I can very easily drill into what's going on. So this is just another way to leverage a service kind of beyond the constructs that you'd normally think of being just a port or a device. I'm actually using a path and a combination of paths to say, as long as all these paths are okay, I'm fine. But if any one of them changes, I want to know about it. Let's go on to our next example, and we're going to extend this to be even a little bit more complex than the original order services service. This is going to pick up components that are even beyond ports, devices, and paths. But the purpose of this service is to look at an overall kind of a retail application and the connection between, for this retail application, between multiple data centers. I've got data centers both in Mexico and Brazil that are making this retail application work, and I've actually got some customers in Mexico that are trying to access this. So they're accessing a distributed application, some of which live on servers in Mexico, and some of which live on servers in Brazil. Now, there's a lot of things that can go wrong when you get this type of a distribution. You've got service providers in the middle. You've got quality that could be a problem over those WAN links. You've got certain pieces of a server that are delivering the application that can fail off. You've got the servers themselves that may have a problem. I just had a change in here too. This is interesting. But in this case, I'm actually looking at, I'm using a combination of probes, IPSLA probes, to look at performance. If I drill into this on the left side, probably a little bit easier to see. I'm actually doing a path to look at performance from Brazil back to Mexico. So I've got an IPSLA probe looking at a synthetic transaction performance monitor. So this will tell me a story if I've got issues connecting between Mexico City and Brazil. I've actually also got a path in here. I've got two paths, and these paths are telling me that I've got anomalies right now because I've got a path differentiation between Brazil and Mexico City and back. So I wanted to look at asymmetric routing here, which is why I've got two paths, because if I've got asymmetric routing or if I've got a change in behavior here, this can impact the application. It may not be down, but it may be impacting it enough where I've got users who are suffering. Same type of thing that we looked at for the order processing example is I've got servers on both sides of my links. So I've got a distributed application, I've got multiple servers, I've got people connecting into both of these. They have to connect to each other, and they both have to be operational in order to be running the way that they should. So I've got degraded service all the way around here, but I'm actually at the top level saying that this is not available because I've actually got a connectivity issue. So this connectivity issue is connecting into one of the servers. Actually, this is a connection into Brazil. So this is an example where you can go from something that's pretty simple at the Internet links example and get something that's a little bit more complex. And you can modify these servers as you need to, as you define more, how do I want to respond to and identify a service impact? What does the service impact mean for this? And you can, as you determine that, you can continue to augment this over time, and the service metrics will just continue to go. You still got the service history. As you change it, that service definition is just going to be reflected automatically. So let's take this. These are the standard services. These are just some examples for you to think about. Let's take this another step, and let's look at a couple of the special services. The first one of these is the branch office. Now, the branch office and the CIO, which I'll talk about in a minute, have been around for quite a while. The ability to create a branch office service, to look at remote connectivity and remote connection performance has been around, and that's a special type of service because a branch office type service ties back to a number of the business level insight reports that we can show. And I'll actually show a couple examples of both the branch office and CIO reporting in a minute as well. But the branch office service is good for customers that have got remote sites. So you've got remote locations, that may have redundant connectivity. This is just an example of two interfaces that give redundancy back to Burbank. In addition, I'm putting an SLA metric in here. Now this is an IPSLA. So this gives me the ability to add IPSLA probes that talk about the performance and any performance issues with my WAN links. Now, this is really helpful, especially if you're doing things like video or voice over IP out to these remote locations. You can use IPS. I'm a big fan of IPSLA. You can use that to look at MOS scores and jitter scores and report on that and actually look at failures in these types of and performance impacts in these types of applications and have it impact the actual service. So I can see connectivity being fine, and I can see a service impact using IPSLA and have it reflect at the service level. I've got degraded service because I've got MOS scores that are out of bounds. The ultimate goal of that is to get ahead of your customers calling and saying, I can't make calls. So this is a really good example. The branch office service is a little bit special. If I actually go in and edit this service, just as an example, you'll see we've got the tag field right here. And for branch office services, you want that to be set to branch. All the other ones we looked at were standard. The CIO is one that we'll talk about next as well. So let's talk about the CIO service. Now, when you look at the CIO service, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the reporting, is the CIO service gives you the ability, again, to elevate for a management level dashboard the state of your network and the state of your services in an aggregate to be able to be viewed sort of in a dashboard fashion, in a report fashion. And the CIO service is really intended for what it says here, kind of C-level management, to be able to get a very quick picture of what the current state of the network is. And I'll talk about more of that when we look at the reporting. But let's take a look at some of the components of this. Now, take a look at the documentation when you set up a CIO service, because there is a certain format that you want to be able to follow. The first of which is the base service name should be called CIO, and that because it ties back into some of the reporting. When you get into the components, when you look at things like DNS and Internet and load balancers, these are just things that I created because these are major areas that I want to focus on as kind of a step down or a tier of services that I want to report on together. So I've got my network. Within my network, I've got my data center, I've got wireless, I've got my service provider links all put together. So if I've got a network, I've got a degraded network service right now because I've got an issue in the data center. If I take a look at the data center, I've got an impact in Tampa. So from an element standpoint, I'm going to see elements and I'm going to see notifications and alerts for these outages. That's fine. But from a service standpoint, you can actually now relate this back to, I've got a service, my network service is depending on this, and because I've got an outage, I've actually got an impact. So from a management level, you can say, this is something that I need to pay attention to because I've got degraded service. The CIO service type allows you to put this together in, again, pretty much any format that you want. It takes a little bit of thinking as to how you want to group these. But once this is set up, it's very easy to use it for reporting and very quick management reporting and dashboarding. So these are the examples. Let's take a step back a little bit and let's talk about events, incidents, alerts, and that type of thing. In addition to service-based alerts telling me I've got a problem, I've got the ability to look at now things that are about traffic and aggregate traffic. So these are just examples of the alerts that I've had actually over the last few days. So over the last week, I've actually got these incidents and alerts that have come into my system for the different services. But I've got the ability to alert based on a service component, and it's going to tell me what's really driving that impact. So this is service impact in the details field. And if I drilled into this, obviously I can go, I can right-click on this, I can go directly into the Explorer menu. So I can drill from this into the Explorer and get direct access to what's really happening. But I've got one impact statement and one incident that tells me I've got a problem. If I did this over my internet services, internet links right here, I'm actually tracking high traffic. So I've actually got high traffic here. I can drill into this and I can actually identify which interface is driving traffic. Same thing with low traffic. But it's very easy for me to be able to see at a service level where I've got changes, where I've got problems, where I've got things that might be impacting my services. Now, just like any events, these can be forwarded over to your ticketing systems. They can be enriched. I had a question from somebody, actually this was a couple of years ago, when we did one of the original Tech Talks on services. They asked about being able to delay, especially in a case where you've got redundant links. You've got an active and a backup link. If the primary goes down, it may take a while for the backup to come online. They said, can we delay the alert before it actually comes in? So it gives it 10 or 15 minutes before the backup comes online, before it actually tells me that I've got an impact. And the answer to that question is absolutely yes. Just like any event and any incident in the EMS, you've got the ability to do those levels of controls. These are just examples of some of the things where I can actually get visibility into what's going on. Now, one thing to note, sort of as a practice, when you're setting up services, you've got at each service level, you have the ability to enable and raise events. In many of my cases, I only want to event based on the top level service. There's a couple examples in here where you'll see that I'm actually generating events at the subservice level as well, and you can do that. You want to be careful of that too, because you end up getting some level of redundancy, and might consider that noise to some degree as well. But events are really helpful, and you've got complete control over what you want to be able to do with them. Let's talk about some of the reports. So I'm going to show you examples of some of the standard reports that are service-related that come with Entuity. Some of you may have seen these already, especially if you've done some work with reports and services, but I'll just walk through some of these to give you some examples. Again, the two focuses of services are availability, so component-level aggregation based on the rules and constructs that you've built to look at overall availability of that service. The service delivery perspective is going to look at a day-by-day aggregate look at all your services. So it's going to take a look at all the services that I've got based on a view. I'm looking at my all services view, so just the ones that are there. And I've gone back 31 days to look at overall service availability. Now, I've got a lot of green bars here. That's great. I've got a couple days here where I've had some problems. and I can actually click on these to get more details. Now, I can also do that just by selecting the Service Availability Report, and if I take a look at that, let's just look at an example. This is the availability report. I actually ran this over a course of a month. This ran from January 13th through February 13th. And I've actually got pretty good availability lately, but initially I had some issues. And when I had issues, I'm actually going to, actually I got an issue here too, I see. But where I had issues, it's actually giving me the time frame and the duration of that either degraded state or down state. So this is a detailed look at an individual service and its availability over time. So this is just a good example in detail. It's something that from a management perspective, you can very easily drill into to get it. This is something that, you know, as any report, if you want to be able to schedule these and email them, you can do that as well. Let's take a look at those branch office and CIO reports. So this is the multiple branch office perspective, and again, these are available out of the Insight Center. They're also available just as a standard report, but this is a good quick launch, quick access capability. The multiple branch office perspective is really good, especially where you're managing a lot of remote sites and you're using that branch office service type. This is going to look at all the branch offices that I've got in my system, and it's going to look at the current availability and identify if I have any WAN link connectivity issues and any device issues. So this is a very good kind of heads-up display across the board for every service that I've got. Now, if I wanted to drill into this, I can very easily do that. The hyperlinks are going to allow me to do that here. The SLA quality, I'll just make a note here. This is Cisco IPSLA. This is not just a service level metric. This is IPSLA quality. So if I've got IPSLA metrics in here, that's where this comes from. But if I drill into Tampa as an example and go into just the standard branch office perspective for this one branch, again, this is giving me access to, I've got some device reachability issues right now, and over my period I've got some issues. So I've actually got the reachability was 89% over the month. So if I mouse over some of the metrics, I can see more details as well. IPSLA quality, I can see detailed reports and drill into that. I've got access to things like spare port summaries. So if I'm looking at a branch and I'm monitoring those switches, I can see the spare ports very quickly, going from a management level report into something that is giving me a great deal of information and insight into both the behavior of that branch and possibly the capacity of the branch. Now, we call this branch office perspective, but it doesn't have to be a remote location. This can be a remote site, certainly, but it can also be a rack and a row in a data center. It's a logical grouping, it's a logical location with a set of connectivity. And you can set these up however you want to, so they don't have to be a geographic thing. They can actually be, a floor or a building as a kind of a location set. So let's take a look at the CIO perspective. Now, again, I want you to think about how to elevate the monitoring from just element-based monitoring when you're looking at notifying management of I've got a problem here, I've got a problem here. These are the things that are broken. From my standpoint, I come back and say, okay, does that impact anything and should I care about it? And the answer might be yes, the answer might be no. The CIO perspective answers the question that says, how does an executive see the overall state of the services that they're supporting? So if I'm in the business of running networks, how do my managers and how do my the CIO or CTO or whatever C-level person see the state of my overall organization and the network? So the construct of the CIO service, which is what we built, and I showed as an example earlier, is going to be reflected in this level of report. Now, this is a very easy dashboard. You could actually take this and put it in a dashboard and be able to display it. But this gives me, as a C-level person, a very good look to say, I've got an issue with My data center is probably something that I need to pay attention to because my SLA looks like it's a problem. Now, this is a real SLA. You actually build an SLA component into this if you choose to. If you don't choose to, it won't show up here. But in my case here, I've got a data center problem where I've got availability. Now, I can click on this, and it's going to take me to an SLA, just a summary, just a detailed summary. But what this tells me is important is because I've got an availability issue here. But the big part is if I'm perfect for the rest of the month, I'm not going to make the SLA. So I've got to automatically, I got 2 weeks before the end of the month. It's time for me to start explaining to my customers that I'm not going to meet my goal. But at least I've got a heads up for that. And the CIO report really answers that question. So one of the things that you want to think about is, do you have people that are asking for this type of information? Is this something that, rather than having to build a whole lot of out-of-band processes and reports and spreadsheets, is this something that you might be able to give access to your CIO, or just email them the report so they can see the state, to give them a good heads up as to what's going on and what the business services and the network services that you're providing are really doing. I think that's what we've got for examples. Let me go back to the slides for a minute. And we'll go back a little bit to the beginning, more technically, of what services are. My intention today was to help you think a little bit out of the box so you can look at elevating your game, to look at services and have applications and some ideas and examples that, all the things that you've seen here are things that have come from our customers. So let's look at the components that you can actually use to drive a service definition. Now, all of these, again, are in the documentation, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. But, looking at devices with ports, the combinations of those, like we did with the order processing or even the Brazil retail example. Individual ports, especially if you're looking at things like, commodity internet. I've got a financial customer that I've been working with that has got multiple service providers for each one of their remote locations, and they want to be able to track the actual availability and performance for each one of the service providers to each one of their remote sites. So having very simple services that have just got those interfaces and those ports involved are something that they can start tracking that automatically. Servers or other components, any type of device level component is something that you can add in as a service. Network paths. This is a perfect opportunity to look at an aggregation of multiple paths to tell a story of these paths make up a service, and I want to be able to say that I've got a service, a perfect service, or I've got some degraded level of service based on the paths that traffic are taking across the network. Applications are really about IP or ICMP application pings that we do, the application monitoring capability that we've got in Entuity. Those components can be put into a service as well. IPSLA. This is something, again, I spoke about this earlier. This is something that I've used historically. I see a lot of our customers starting to use it to do especially voice over IP, synthetic transactions, to look for performance degradations across their WAN links. Being able to add IPSLA operations into a service is going to give you a much quicker heads up to possible voice and video impact from your customers. Whether you're doing Skype as a business or whether you're using other VoIP or video platforms, and you're obviously using Cisco technology, this is something that you can do. Effectively, any component of a device can be added in. So things like temperature sensors or power supplies, but even a temperature sensor on a device, if you're picking up that metric on a device in a remote location, will give you a heads up to a possible service impact in the future. If the temperature starts being a problem, you've possibly got a service problem in the future. So again, you're being proactive and you're reporting that and monitoring that at a service level. And again, services can be built inside of services, so you've got a service hierarchy. I think with that, Pat, let's look for any questions.
Okay, Pete, we have a couple. The first one is, how often is availability checked for a service?
The state of a service will reflect the components that it's made up of. So effectively, if I have a device go down, the minute that that device changes state and becomes unavailable, the service will update itself and generate an event. So it's effectively real time for that level of alerting. When you're looking at the traffic aggregation and you're looking at that level of performance, that's actually checked every 5 minutes. So we look at the database, we look at the most recent samples for the interfaces that are included in the service definition, and every 5 minutes we're going to give you the, track the traffic and the aggregate traffic values. And if there's a threshold breach for those and you've got that enabled, then we'll generate an event accordingly. From an availability standpoint, in the availability charts, when you look at the service, you look at the charts and you click on available, degraded, unknown, those are actually tracked every 5 minutes. So we're going to look at the percentage availability over that period. And we're going to look at percentage availability over 5 minutes, and we're going to roll that up. But that level of reporting is, again, 5 minutes, and that's something that you've got accessible for reporting. You've got accessible for custom reports or downloading the raw values for your own third-party reports. Anything else?
Yeah, we have another question, and if I set it up for services, how can I eliminate the noise so I am only sending events that are service-based?
That's a good question, because in a lot of cases I'm going to look at an operational view in Entuity, and I'm going to look at, I'll maybe be ticketing on the incidents that are coming out of that. But if I'm viewing the incidents, I may be mixing service-based alerts and all my element-based alerts. Now, we do a good job of correlation and noise reduction, because the idea with Entuity is to eliminate all the background noise and let you see what the real picture and behavior of the network is. But you can take that a step further, and you could generate an event or generate a view with your services in and filter on that view to only show service level events and incidents. That's probably a really good way to do that. That's actually the view that we were looking at earlier, where I actually had a list of all my service outages and service impacts in one place. So that's probably a good approach to take. If you're ticketing, you can ticket based on that. Obviously, from a ticketing system, you can treat the service events a little bit differently. And just like any other event in the system, you can take service events and you can augment and enrich them to extend the story and extend the details that are being shown. Anything else?
Nope, that's it. Thank you, Pete.
All right. So let's start our wrap-up, I guess. A quick reminder, if you haven't signed up yet, the Entuity Training Academy is available for your information and reference. This is a really good thing to do for all of our customers to get signed up for this. So in addition to training, you've got access to a lot of information and all the documentation and additional insight in one place. So you can sign up today and take advantage of this portal. Take a look at the sign-up form. You can go to Entuity.com and take a look at the login area at the top banner of the home page, and that'll give you access as well as the ability to sign up. And then to wrap up, we'll send you a video link of today's presentation that you can use. If you have any questions about today's content or would like a personal demonstration, just contact your Entuity system engineer. Our next Tech Talk is on April 11th, and the topic is the BMC dashboard integration with TrueSite Operations Management. If you're a TrueSight Operations Management user or you're thinking about how it can help your IT organization, you won't want to miss this insightful session. So that's it for today. Thanks for attending, and we hope to see you online April 11th.